the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Today, I am lucky enough to have with me Jose Pablo Iriarte. Jose, welcome to Florida Writer Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to be on your show.
Can you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure. I am an author of science fiction and fantasy short stories and novels. I am currently best known for my short stories and for a novelette. I'm known for stories that are kind of big on emotional content, and I have been published in a lot of the top magazines in science fiction and fantasy: Lightspeed, Uncanny, Fireside, Strange Horizons. I'm also currently director at large for the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America.
Well, that sounds like a big job.
I've only had it for about 13 days, so I'm still kind of getting used to it. But it is big, actually. I guess I've done more like local level writers groups, and I thought that this was similar but national. But it's a lot like suddenly stepping onto the board of a corporation. You know, there's non-disclosure agreements and all kinds of fiduciary information and tax stuff and things that you better not mess up, or you'll lose your 501c3 something or other. I don't know. So it's been a whirlwind of learning a new world. Yeah.
What will your biggest task be?
So far, I am, I think all of us who are on the board of directors will attend directors meetings and weigh in and vote on all the general stuff. But then in particular, I am liaisoning to some subcommittees within SIFWA, SFWA. I am liaison to the YA and middle grade committee, and to, I think, to the short fiction committee. I volunteered for that and haven't heard if it's official yet or not. And I will be the liaison to the mentorship committee, which basically is designed to help pair newly selling authors with folks who've been around the block a few times and maybe can give them advice.
I'm encouraged that it is you who will be taking on that role, because I know how much you've helped writers with the Florida Writers Association. And we can all be honored that you are part of our ranks. So
that's very kind of you. Thank you.
Can you tell us what's one of the stories you're most proud of?
Well, I think I tend to often be short-sighted and be proudest of whatever I've most recently had out. So I've got a story in the May-June issue of Uncanny Magazine called Proof by Induction that's currently kind of at the top of my mind. It's weird because I am a science fiction and fantasy reader, and that's kind of what I cut my teeth on. And so that's the fandom that I entered. And when I started writing stories, those are the magazines that I tried to sell to. But my muse seems to sit awkwardly within the genre. And I read a lot of stories that are only just glancingly speculative. And this story was, among many things, it was an attempt by me to be a little bit more dead on within science fiction. It was also the first story I wrote that featured math as its kind of scientific core, a mathematician trying to prove a theorem thought to be unprovable. And so I had to really kind of work outside of my wheelhouse and grow a little bit and figure out. I think that the struggle that I've always had with hard science fiction is how do you write convincingly about technology or discoveries or whatever that don't exist yet? It almost feels like you have to discover something to be able to write about it plausibly. So I worked to kind of to learn how to bluff my way through stuff there, and that I was proud of that. I think of older stories of mine. I have a story from 2016 from Strange Horizons magazine called Life in Stone, Glass, and Plastic that might be, just from a prose, wordcraft, storycraft perspective, it might be the best actual prose work that I've done. There's many things that can make a story successful or not. But just from in terms of a pure craft standpoint, I feel like that might be my high water mark.
That comment makes me ask, prose, like, what do you judge a good prose work to be?
I think there's lots of different ways that prose can succeed. So I don't want to take a stand on like readability versus, for instance, poetic prose. I think that the prose needs to serve the story. And so sometimes very dense, lush, descriptive, figurative prose can be what best serves the story. And sometimes invisible prose that takes a step back and lets you just immerse yourself can be. So I think just prose that is working well with what the story is doing. But what makes me proud of Life in Stone, Glass, and Plastic was the way that I echoed what was happening thematically in the story, in the prose. The story deals heavily with memory. The protagonist, his wife, has dementia, and he's concerned about his ability as he ages to continue to care for her, and the threat, the fear of losing his own abilities as well. But then, and the magical element within the story is these murals that when you touch them, you receive experiences, memories that the artist has managed to implant in them. And so there's lots of passing, like borderline symbolic references to tactile things and to the connection between touch and memory, and to how small pieces kind of add up to a big picture, where the wordcraft is reflecting what's going on in the story. I'm really proud of that. That's not something that I would say that I've, I hope that I'm no slouch in general when it comes to wordcraft, but I feel like that's a story where I put extra attention as opposed to having the prose be more backseat.
So that the five senses just bring the story to life more than what you would normally have done, in that you had to pay extra attention. It sounds to me like really with things that are tactile.
Yeah, tactile more than anything else, because I wanted to mirror that experience, that experience of touching the mural and feeling what's going on, and then having an experience. And so even where the protagonist wasn't touching the mural, there were constant, he was like a night custodian, and so he'd reach into his tool belt, and you'd get a description of him grabbing a particular kind of spatula and the way it feels, and the memories that associated. Oh, the last time he'd held this tool was when he was redoing the tiles, and his hands hurt for weeks afterwards. And just kind of that constant back and forth between what's happening in the speculative element of the story and what's happening in the non-speculative part.
And how do your own experiences influence the way you write that? Do you pick up the spatula and hold it and concentrate heavily on what it feels like and what the weight is and the way it looks and how you bend your wrist?
Well, in that particular, instant, I actually did think back to when I was a teenager. We had an RV, a recreational vehicle that my parents owned, and it was a kind of small and rundown used one that we did a massive amount of work on turning it into something nicer. We had it painted. That we paid somebody else to do. We also paid somebody to reupholster it, but then we did everything else ourselves. And it, like a lot of smaller RVs, and especially smaller RVs of the early 80s, late 70s, it didn't come with like running water tanks and stuff. Like there was a toilet, but it was like a chemical toilet, and we don't want that. So we installed tanks, we installed pumps. It didn't have a shower, so we basically we had somebody else weld for us the foundation of a shower, and then we laid it in with fiberglass, which I had never worked with before, and then we laid down tile and grout. And I actually did draw on my memory of what that did to my hands, and what I remembered about spreading the grout with a spatula and all that. So I actually did there. But in a larger sense, I draw very, very heavily on my lived experiences. I would say that I border on confessional, whether that's good or bad. That's just the way it is. I have learned that when I am writing about my deepest, darkest fears or regrets or experiences, pains, those are the stories that have had the most success. And so whereas once upon a time, maybe that was something that would sometimes accidentally work its way into a story, now it's something that's very prominent in my process. I'm always trying to figure out, I don't have anything until I know where I come into this story.
Intriguing. Tell me more. How did you, so as you're thinking about, as your writing has evolved from when you first started to now, where you're really throwing your personality, your experiences, your deep, dark fears into those stories, if you go back and you look at some of the early ones you did, do you think you could rewrite them?
That's an interesting question. There are some stories where I did that just by accident, but there are stories that I look back on, and they're, in some cases, they are stories that sold, and it's just fascinating to me. I'll look at that story and I'll go, wow, somebody paid me money for that story, so it must be okay. But I would never in a million years write that story now. And I'm not putting down the story or the editor, but so for instance, I've got a very early story for me from 2015 called Message from Beyond, which is, it's a cute little story, I guess, about a con man whose aunt was a psychic, famous psychic in her day, and he's trying to, she is vegetative and non-communicative, but he's trying to convince people that she still has the gift and that he can act as a go-between, when in fact it's really just him making stuff up, and it's an all right story, but there's really, like, that story doesn't really draw on my, soul in the same kind of way. And I look at that and I go, oh, wow, that's so weird. Where did that come from? I would not write that now.
Our own evolution is quite an interesting thing to trace. I know just from the stuff I wrote in the very beginning, sometimes I'm amazed. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, interesting. What appeals to you about writing short stories, particularly?
What I love about short stories, both as a reader and a writer, is that they're kind of self-contained, and that a really good short story, and again, different people might seek different things from a short story, but what really speaks to me is when a short story delivers a heavy emotional punch, and you didn't have, I feel like, I've written short stories and novels, and I feel like if I've got 65, 70, 80,000 words to get you to feel something, I feel like I can do that, because by the time you're getting to the end, if you've read this far, you've experienced some things. And then at the end, I can kind of maybe put those into perspective. But if I can get you to feel something in 800 words, I feel really accomplished. I feel really powerful if I can do that. And when someone else does it to me, it just leaves me kind of breathless, and it leaves me going, wow, that's amazing. So that's what I love, that punch. And I do feel like when short fiction delivers that, and this is not a slam against longer works, but I do feel like that feeling is more acute because it hasn't been a slow build.
When I think about novels, so many times it takes me 20, 30 pages before I start to want to be friends with the protagonist. And at the end of the story, I might close the last page and think, oh, I'm going to miss you. I'm so sad that our journey together is over. But when it takes me 20 to 30 pages to get into it, I'm usually frustrated because that will take me a while to read. Mm-hmm. I mean, I will, once I get past that initial introduction, I will devour page after page after page after page. But in the beginning, it's like 2 pages, put it down, 3 pages, put it down. And it might take me 1 to 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
So I agree with you with the short stories. What advice could you give people about creating that emotional tug in urgency with a short story?
Well, the big, for me, the biggest thing has been kind of bringing the threads together, rooting it very strongly in my own emotions and feelings, because if they are things that I am feeling intensely, then I will have an easier time expressing it. There was there is a website called Letters of Note, and I read a letter on it one time, and last time I searched for it, it wasn't there. So for whatever reason, they've taken it down. But it was a letter that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote to his niece, who had written him asking for a critique of something she'd written, a story, I guess, or maybe a first chapter. And he basically said, look, this isn't great. And his advice to her was, eventually, when you've practiced a lot and when you've written a lot, you'll be able to write compellingly about lots of things. Maybe, hopefully, if you've got the gift, you're going to be able to write compellingly about anything. And there are certainly authors that I've thought of in my life. Well, I would read that person's laundry lists, But when you're starting out, you've got to like sell your heart, because that's the only thing that you have that's uniquely you. And I read that, and I guess maybe around the same time that I was noticing which stories of mine were the ones that took off, and I really that really landed for me. So I think that's the first one. And there's all kinds of things that we can learn about not using distancing words, or about how to make a protagonist engaging, or so there's lots of craft elements that we could talk about for hours and hours and hours. But I think the biggest, most powerful thing to me, it's like method acting, but writing.
Method writing, yes. Yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it. So you've won or been nominated for some pretty big awards. Mm-hmm. What's it like to be nominated for a really big one?
It's really exciting and flattering, and definitely something I hope I get to experience again sometime. But it is kind of complex, and I find that people don't talk a lot. People don't talk a lot about what happens, after you are selling, or what happens after you're nominated for them. We always focus on just kind of getting there, and think that that's the end of the story and that's the happy ever after or whatever. Actually, finding out that I've been nominated was kind of cool. Got a phone call from Kat Rambo, who was at the time the president of Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, to let me know that my novelette, Substance of My Lives, The Accidents of Our Births, had been nominated. And for me, that was enormous, because I grew up reading science fiction and fantasy, and if I would go to the Walden Books or B. Dalton and pull out the books to look at them, and if the cover had those little shields on them that said that they had been nominated for a Hugo or for a Nebula, then I knew those were probably going to be good books. And so that was definitely, so for me, this was something that I had always known about, had always been on my radar since probably I was 12 or 13. And it took me a very long time to actually sell anything. I started sending out stories and stuff to magazines when I was a teenager, and I was 41 when I made my first professional sale. So I spent a lot of years thinking that I was not ever gonna make a sale, and then to suddenly have that validation, that was absolutely wonderful. There is kind of a flip side that I've been on panels where we talk about what it's like to be nominated, and everyone just kind of talks about the good times, and I'm surprised that no one talks about anything else. But one of the things that happens, there were a lot of people when I got nominated. I would look on the fandom news websites like File 770. There'd be a lot of people who were like, "Who? I've never heard of this person," and then suddenly there was like this new round of reviews of people who were like, "Let's read everything that's nominated and see if these things deserve to be nominated or not." And I definitely read multiple reviews that were like, yeah, it's all right. It's not that good. It seemed like the reviews got harsher after I'd been nominated for Nebula than before. So that was something that threw me for a loop a little bit. I also had this idea, and I think we have the same idea when we first start selling things. We think, well, now you've got the keys to the washroom. Now everybody's going to know who you are and you're a big deal. And then it turns out, nah, and the same thing happens. Okay, now everybody in science fiction is going to know who I am. No, not true.
I heard a valedictorian speech one time, and the student who was giving the speech had said, well, for that 15 minutes of fame of standing up on the podium, the platform, in order to give his valedictorian speech, there's always that 16th minute, and it's that 16th minute that really counts. So don't give up everything that you had learned before for that 15 minutes of fame, so to speak, and make sure that you don't blow it all up thinking that you're the greatest thing in the world, because there is a 16th minute, and that's what I'm hearing from you as well.
That's a really interesting metaphor.
So Jose Pablo Iriarte, how can people get in touch with you?
So I am pretty active on Twitter. My Twitter handle is LabyrinthRat, and my website is labyrinthrat.com. You can also find me at joseiriarte.com. I don't know which one of those is harder to spell. I don't really blog actively, but I do have, for instance, my bibliography is there and links to my works. A lot of my work can be read for free online because a lot of it's published in online magazines. I am also on Facebook at facebook.com/labyrinthrat.
Sounds pretty easy to find. Are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Sure. I'm not a fast thinker, so I'll cross my fingers and give it my best shot.
Is a hot dog a sandwich? Why or why not?
A hot dog is a taco, not a sandwich.
Okay, I'll go with that unique.
Rounds it on 3 sides out of 6, as opposed to a sandwich, which is 2 sides out of 6.
Okay, very good. What kind of secret society would you like to start?
Ooh, let's see. A secret society of people who control the book industry. Yes.
Ooh, that's a good one. I think we'll get a lot of listeners to join that secret society.
Yes.
When I got my graduate degree, I was always fascinated by they. They said this work is canonical. I'd be like, why did they say it? Because I think it stinks.
Yeah.
So whoever they are, I'm not sure, but watch out.
We'll call ourselves the they.
Oh, I like it. I'm definitely the first member to join. And our last question, if I can talk, what mythical creature would improve the world most if it existed?
Gotta be unicorns. I don't see how it could be anything else.
Unicorns, they, and tacos.
Yes.
Jose Pablo Iriarte, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You have been listening to another episode of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Jose Pablo Iriarte is a Cuban-American writer, high school math teacher, and a parent of 2. Their fiction can be found in magazines such as Uncanny, Lightspeed, and Strange Horizons, and has been nominated for the Nebula Award, longlisted for the Otherwise Award, and reprinted in various year's best compilations. Jose currently serves as Director at Large for Science Fiction Writers of America. Learn more at labyrinthrat.com or look for Jose on Twitter at labyrinthrat. Learn, network, and grow at the 20th Annual Florida Writers Conference, October 14th through 17th, 2021. The Florida Youth Conference is October 16th, and if you know anyone younger than 18, make sure that they attend to grow their writing prowess. Experience this energy and supercharge your writing at the 20th Annual Florida Writers Conference. For more information, visit floridawriters.org. See you next time.